I said it because I wanted him to hate me, though nobody believes that part. They think I'm just another cruel woman who says vicious things when she's angry, but the truth is I calculated every syllable before it left my mouth. I knew exactly how much it would wound him, which is precisely why I chose those words. What people don't understand is that cruelty can be an act of mercy when you're trying to protect someone from discovering what you really are. My entire life was built on a foundation of lies I'd been telling for so long that I'd almost started believing them myself. The business I'd built, the reputation I'd cultivated, the person I'd presented to David for 18 months, none of it could survive if he kept digging into my past. Every day he got closer to the truth, and I could see it in the way he'd started asking questions about my early career, about the origins of my algorithms, about the gap in my resume from 4 years ago. The stakes weren't just our relationship, they were my entire identity. Everyone thinks I destroyed us because I was bitter or bored, but I was terrified. And fear makes monsters of us all. The real confession isn't about what I said in that final fight. It's about the sabotage I engineered months earlier, the trap I set that he was still too broken to see. By the time you finish reading this, you'll understand why I told him my ex was superior in bed, and why losing David was the only outcome that could have saved him from the person I am. I met David at a tech conference in Austin when he was presenting his machine learning framework, and I was still pretending I'd built my platform from scratch. He had these earnest brown eyes and a habit of pushing his glasses up when he got excited, and for the first 15 minutes of our conversation I genuinely forgot about the stolen code sitting on my hard drive. My imposter syndrome had metastasized into something malignant by then. Every compliment felt like an accusation, every success like a countdown to exposure. David didn't know any of that. He saw a confident founder, a woman who'd bootstrapped her way to a Series B, someone who had it all figured out. The first warning sign I ignored was how desperately I needed him to keep seeing that version of me. We moved in together 8 months later, into a loft with concrete floors and windows that overlooked the bay. He'd leave little sticky notes on the bathroom mirror, "You're brilliant," and "Crush that meeting today," and I'd smile while my stomach churned with the knowledge that my brilliance was borrowed. The second hint I missed was my own reflexive flinching whenever he offered to help debug my system. I'd snap at him, "I've got it handled," when the reality was I couldn't risk him seeing how similar it was to the architecture Ryan had developed years before. The small decision that would ruin everything came on a Tuesday in March. David mentioned he'd been approached by a recruiter from Google for his dream role on their AI ethics team, and I felt something cold and sharp slide between my ribs. Word count 420 hook at 7. I told him I wasn't sure he was ready for that level of scrutiny, that his work was still rough around the edges. The lie tasted metallic on my tongue, but I watched him deflate in real time, and some twisted part of me felt safer. If David was at Google, he'd be surrounded by engineers who might recognize the patterns in my code. He might casually mention his girlfriend's startup, and someone might get curious. So I planted doubt where confidence should have been, and I told myself I was protecting him from failure. They say love means wanting the best for someone, but what they don't tell you is how much easier it is to love people when they're just grateful to be standing next to you. By June, David had stopped interviewing altogether. He was working contract gigs from our kitchen table, his posture curling in on itself like a burned leaf. I should have felt guilty, but instead I felt relief so profound it made me dizzy. That's when Ryan started texting again after 2 years of silence. Not from his regular number, he was smarter than that, but from burner accounts that appeared and disappeared like digital ghosts. "You have 3 weeks," one read, "before I send the timestamps to TechCrunch." I deleted it, but my hands shook for an hour. Ryan didn't want money. He wanted credit, and my entire company was built on denying him that. I told myself David was happier now anyway, that I'd saved him from the stress of a cutthroat corporate job. The first small consequence I dismissed was the way he stopped sleeping through the night. Word count 600 hook at 10, then came the night I found him crying in the bathroom at 3 a.m., his laptop open to a rejection email from a position he'd never told me he'd applied for. "They said my references raised red flags," he whispered, and my blood turned to cement in my veins. I called in favors from old colleagues, whispered suggestions that David had been let go from his previous role for cause. It hadn't been intentional at first, just a casual "he struggled with boundaries" to a friend who knew a friend. But those words had metastasized, spreading through the community like a virus. David didn't know I'd poisoned his reputation. He just thought he'd failed. I held him while he sobbed, and I felt myself splitting in two, the woman who loved him and the monster who destroyed him, both occupying the same skin. Word count 780 hook at 13, the deeper culpability hit me 3 days later when I transferred $10,000 to Ryan's offshore account. It was the third payment that month, and my CFO was starting to ask questions about the consulting fees. I realized I'd become the kind of person who pays off one man while dismantling another, and I couldn't tell which crime weighed heavier. The truth bomb I'd been sitting on wasn't just the stolen code. It was the way I'd systematically isolated David from every opportunity that could have saved him from me. When Ryan's texts escalated to photos of him outside our building, I knew I couldn't keep both plates spinning. One of them had to break, and only one of them deserved to be set free. The first significant relationship damage came 2 weeks before the final fight. David found the transaction records. Not all of them, he wasn't technical enough to dig that deep, but enough to see large sums moving to an entity called RD Consulting. He confronted me over dinner, his voice small and tired. "Are you in trouble?" he asked. "Is someone threatening you?" The concern in his eyes nearly broke me because he still believed I was someone worth saving. I became defensive immediately, lashing out about how he wouldn't understand startup pressures, how he was being paranoid. "You don't get to question my business decisions," I snapped, "when you can't even land a proper job." The words landed like a slap, and I saw him physically recoil. That was the moment I knew I would have to finish what I'd started. Word count 1080 hook at 18. What David didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I'd been the one to install the keylogger on his computer 6 months into our relationship. It was during a weekend trip to Monterey when he'd left his laptop open while showering. I told myself I was just curious about his work, that I wanted to understand his code. The reality was more pathetic. I needed to know if he was suspicious of mine. The hidden action I'd taken that morning was forwarding his portfolio to a recruiter friend with a note that said, "Nice guy, but he's been struggling since his last role imploded. Might be a project." I wanted to help, but I couldn't stop inserting just enough doubt to keep him tethered. The breadcrumb I left for him to find was a draft email in my sent folder, subject line Ray discrete payment. I wanted him to see it. I wanted him to ask. Word count 1320 hook at 22. On the surface, I was still the supportive girlfriend who picked up the slack when his income dipped. I Venmo'd him for utilities without comment, bought groceries, covered our rent. Our friends praised my patience, called me a rock. Privately, I was the architect of his dependency. I'd engineered a situation where leaving me would mean financial ruin, career uncertainty, and a gutted sense of self. The gap between public perception and private reality had become a canyon I could no longer cross. When Sarah, his college friend, pulled me aside at a party and said, "You're so good for him. He's lucky to have you," I felt the lie curdle in my throat. I smiled and said, "I just want him to be happy," while actively ensuring he'd never have the tools to be happy without me. Word count 1440 hook at 24. By August, Ryan's threats had moved from text to physical deliveries. A box arrived at my office containing a flash drive and a note, "The last payment, or this goes to everyone you've ever met." I recognized the drive. It was one I'd used during my last month at his company, before I'd copied the core architecture and vanished. The situation spiraled in a direction I hadn't anticipated when my lawyer called. "Someone's been asking questions about your departure from Innovate Tech," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "They're saying you signed an NDA you may have violated." Ryan wasn't just threatening my relationship anymore. He was coming for my company, my investors, my entire constructed identity. The money was running out, and so was my time. Word count 1680 hook at 28. My worst decision came on a Thursday I now replay in slow motion. David was in the shower, and his phone buzzed with a calendar reminder: interview prep with Marcus. Marcus was a mentor from his grad program, someone who could have opened doors. I picked up his phone. He'd given me the passcode months ago, back when trust was still something we practiced, and I texted Marcus from David's account: "Actually, I'm going to pass on the job search for now. Maya's company is taking off, and I think I'm happier supporting her vision." I deleted the message thread so David would never see it. I convinced myself I was giving him permission to rest, to find his own path. The truth was simpler. I couldn't risk him succeeding outside my shadow. The breadcrumb I left at 35 was a screenshot of that text, saved to my own phone, as if I needed proof of my own monstrosity. Word count 920 hook at 32. 3 nights before the final argument, I had a dream where David found everything. The keylogger logs, the falsified references, the payments to Ryan. In the dream, he didn't yell. He just looked at me with the same expression he'd worn when the rejection emails piled up: quiet, resigned devastation. I woke up in a panic and checked his laptop while he slept. He'd been researching imposter syndrome, reading articles about founders who fake it till they make it. He'd bookmarked a page: when success is built on stolen ideas. My name wasn't there, but my blueprint was. He was getting close. That's when I started planning my exit strategy, not for me, for him. I needed him to leave, and I needed him to hate me enough to never look back. Word count 2100 hook at 35. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday that had begun like any other. David made coffee, asked about my day, mentioned he'd gotten a call back from a startup. I felt the floor tilt beneath my feet. "That's great," I said, my voice tight. He smiled, tentative and hopeful for the first time in months. They said my reference from you really helped. The guilt hit me so hard I nearly confessed right there. Instead, I went to work and found Ryan waiting in the lobby. He walked me outside, voice low and pleasant. Final deadline, Friday. I transferred the money from my personal account, the one David couldn't see. That night, David wanted to celebrate his job prospect. He opened wine, put on music, tried to touch me in a way that asked for connection. I felt Ryan's ghost in the room, felt the stolen code humming beneath my skin, felt David's hope like a noose. That's when I said it. I told him Ryan was better in bed. I described specific acts, particular ways Ryan had known my body. I watched the hope drain from David's face like water from a cracked glass. Word count 2,520 hook at 42. He didn't yell. He just set down his wine, went to the bedroom, and packed a backpack. I sat on the couch, my hands shaking so violently I had to sit on them. When he emerged, he looked younger somehow, stripped of the weight I'd been loading onto his shoulders. I hope he's worth it, David said, and the quiet dignity in his voice almost made me take it all back. Then he added, I'll send someone for the rest of my things. I asked him to stay, to talk, but he was already at the door. You don't get to rewrite this, he said. You said exactly what you meant. He left his key on the counter. I didn't hear from him again. His number went to voicemail, then the automated message changed. By morning, he'd blocked me on every platform. Our mutual friends stopped responding to my texts. My support system, already strained by my months of erratic behavior, crumbled completely. Sarah texted, you broke him, don't contact any of us. Word count 2,880 hook at 48. The person who got hurt most by my continued deception was me, though I wouldn't realize it until later. I told myself David was better off, that I'd freed him. But I'd also ensured he'd never trust himself again. I confirmed his worst fears, that he wasn't good enough, that he was disposable, that his career failures defined him. The irony that I'd caused those failures was a fact I kept in a locked box in my mind. Ryan got his final payment on Friday, but it didn't matter. The Monday after David left, my lawyer called again. Ryan's filed a civil suit. He's got emails you sent him after you left the company discussing the architecture in detail. The trap I'd set for David had become the noose around my own neck. Ryan had been documenting everything, not for money, but for this moment of absolute destruction. Word count 3,180 hook at 53. The direct question came from my board of directors 2 weeks later. Did you build this platform yourself? They asked during an emergency meeting. I could see it in their faces. They'd already run the code comparison Ryan had sent them. I deflected, mentioned the stress of a frivolous lawsuit, promised documentation that didn't exist. But they'd hired forensic engineers. The truth was already in the room, sitting in the silence between my words. I pushed away the one person who tried to help, my CTO, who offered to let me blame him, to say we'd used open-source components we'd forgotten to attribute. I couldn't do it. The person I was had become so entangled with the lies I'd told that I couldn't see a path out that didn't involve taking everyone down with me. I told him I'd handle it myself. I didn't tell him I'd already begun destroying the evidence, which legally was worse than the original theft. Word count 3,480 hook at 58. The setup for the biggest revelation happened on a lonely Thursday night when I was drunk and desperate enough to email David's old mentor Marcus. I used a burner account, subject line your friend's girlfriend. I wrote the message David sent you about passing on opportunities wasn't from him. Check the IP address. It came from his girlfriend's office. I don't know why I did it. Maybe some part of me needed David to know he'd been right about himself, that he was capable, that I'd been the anchor, not the sail. I deleted the account immediately, but the email sent. It was the first honest thing I'd done in years, and it came from the same place as the cruelty, fear, self-loathing, a need to control the narrative even as it unraveled. Word count 3,660 hook at 61. The full confession begins now, though it's not the one anyone expects. Ryan's lawsuit moved forward, but my lawyers found a technicality. The NDA I'd signed was invalid because Ryan himself had stolen the base code from a university project. It was theft layered on theft, a house of cards built by two people who never had an original idea between them. The case settled out of court for a fraction of what he wanted, but the damage to my reputation was irreversible. Articles appeared, tech founder accused of code theft. My investors pulled out. The company I'd built on lies dissolved within months. But that wasn't the worst truth. The worst truth was what I discovered when I finally accessed the keylogger files I'd been too afraid to examine while David was with me. Word count 4,020 hook at 67. The most damning detail was this: David had known for 5 months. He'd found the first piece of evidence, the falsified reference I'd given 6 weeks after I'd made it. He'd confronted his former boss who'd shown him the email trail. He'd known I was sabotaging him and he'd stayed anyway. The keylogger captured his late-night searches, girlfriend sabotaging my career. Why would she do this? Can love and destruction coexist? He deleted his search history, but the logger kept it all. He'd even found the folder where I'd saved the screenshot of the fake text to Marcus. He'd opened it, stared at it for 17 minutes according to the timestamp, and then closed it without saying a word. He'd known I was a monster and had tried to love me anyway. The night I told him Ryan was better, he'd already packed most of his things. He was just waiting for me to give him permission to hate me. I'd played my role perfectly. Word count 4,320 hook at 72. The first major consequence of this revelation hit when I realized I'd destroyed the only person who'd seen the worst of me and chosen to stay. He'd been documenting everything, not to use against me but to understand. He'd written journal entries the keylogger captured. I think she's afraid of being alone with herself. I think she pushes me away so I'll prove I won't leave. I think she needs help. He'd seen my cruelty as a cry for salvation, and I'd interpreted his compassion as weakness. When he left, he took with him the only evidence that I could be loved despite my brokenness. What I'd done to his career was reversible. What I'd done to his ability to trust was not. The final shoe dropped when I found his last search. From the morning he disappeared, domestic abuse, emotional manipulation, resources. He hadn't been researching for himself. He'd been researching for me. Word count 4,620 hook at 77. My concrete fallout spanned 4 distinct areas. Professionally, I'd become a cautionary tale, unhireable and untrustworthy. Socially, my friends hadn't just unfollowed, they testified in Ryan's case, providing evidence of my pattern of dishonesty. Financially, the legal fees had consumed my savings, and I was renting a room in a house with 5 roommates at 34. But the worst damage was internal. I developed a tremor in my left hand that appeared whenever I tried to type. My therapist diagnosed complex PTSD, which felt like a joke. I'd given it to myself after all. The unexpected consequence I hadn't anticipated was my inability to lie anymore. Simple questions, how are you, from a barista, reduced me to tears. I'd broken my own mechanism for survival. Word count 5,100 hook at 85. The moment of genuine self-awareness broke through on a Tuesday when I saw David's new post. He'd started a consulting firm, small but successful. His smile in the photo was cautious, rebuilt piece by piece. The caption, grateful for second chances and for the people who taught me what I deserve. He didn't tag me. He didn't need to. I realized then that I told him Ryan was better in bed not because I wanted him to leave, but because I wanted to be the villain in his story. Villains are simple. Villains don't get sympathy. If I was the villain, he wouldn't waste time trying to understand the pathology behind my actions. He'd just go. He'd heal. He'd forget me. And he had. Word count 5,340 hook at 89. Where I am now is a studio apartment with a Murphy bed and a view of a brick wall. I work as a technical writer for a company that doesn't know my history, though it's only a matter of time before someone Googles deeper than the first page. I haven't dated anyone since David, and I don't expect to. The current state of my existence is a kind of purgatory I designed for myself, and it's exactly what I deserve. Every time I start to feel sorry for myself, I remember that David spent 5 months knowing I was destroying him, and still tried to love me through it. My cruelty was a gift, the only one I had left to give. It gave him permission to value himself. Word count 5,520 hook at 92. I'm telling this story now because yesterday I received a notification. David's consulting firm secured a major contract, one he'd been chasing when we were together, one I'd told him he wasn't ready for. He posted, "Never let someone else's insecurity become your ceiling." 300 people liked it. I stared at those words until they blurred. The title "Everyone Gave Our Breakup, I Told Him My Ex Was Better in Bed" is technically true, but the context reframes everything. I said it because David was preparing to prove his excellence, and I'd have rather been a villain than the fraud who'd been holding him underwater. What I learned imperfectly is that love doesn't always look like support. Sometimes it looks like sacrificing yourself so someone else can finally exhale. I didn't free him from a bad relationship. I freed him from a parasitic one. The moral ambiguity is that my motives were never pure. I wasn't being noble, I was being terrified. But fear, like love, can occasionally produce the right action for the wrong reasons. The internet thinks I'm a monster who destroyed a good man with a cruel comparison. They're not wrong. But they should know he was already rebuilding himself while he was still with me, and my final cruelty was the only way to make him believe he deserved to leave. Judge me however you need to, just don't pity me. I got exactly what I wanted.